Okay, so I actually did this interview with someone from Japan who was speaking Japanese. I don't speak Japanese, and so I got a translator. So what you'll hear is the guest speaking Japanese, and then you'll hear the translator immediately after. This is the first time I've edited or done anything like this, so I hope you enjoy.
His mother was actually really strongly wanted to have a boy so that the boy could take over the Kamakura Buri tradition.
That's a lot of pressure, is it not?
There's a kind of family pride because all of the people in his family have carried it on for so long that at one point it's a point of family pride. One other is it's kind of a responsibility. If his father, and he said in my case as well, if we decided this is it, I'm not interested in carrying on this technique and the art itself, we take on the responsibility of stopping something that was 800 or some years old.
It starts with just taking that leap.
Man, you have to work hard. You have to be incredibly smart.
Choose something that even if it fails, you are going to be proud of it.
Doesn't matter how badly you've gone beaten and down.
Be kind, be kind, be kind.
Become a better person, a better leader, the better business.
Go with your gut.
I'm Samuel Donner, and this is Finding Founders. We'll get back to the podcast right after this break. If you're anything like me, you're probably hoping to spend more time surfing on the beach or just soaking in some summer sun. But to do that, you and your team need to work smarter, not harder. That's why we're so excited about HubSpot's integrated AI tech. It's helping teams automate the more tedious parts of running a business. With AI-powered tools built into HubSpot's CRM, you can do research, pull reports, summarize info, craft content, and write copy in a flash. Recent research shows that marketers are already slicing time spent on manual administrative tasks in half thanks to AI, from 5 to 2.5 hours per day, which amounts to almost 4 weeks per year. With all that extra time, you could watch the latest summer blockbuster every afternoon or pick up a new hobby like maybe pottery, paddleboarding, bread making, maybe all three. So if you're interested in that, learn more and get started today at HubSpot.com. And now, back to the podcast.
Goto Kyukei was saddled with massive responsibility from birth. He was the firstborn son to his father of 50, meaning Goto would have to carry the weight of a tradition going back 28 generations. He comes from a lineage that has perfected the art of Kamakura Buri, which is a method of carving wood and then coating lacquer to make sculptures, plates, tea sets, cutlery, and other household items. But this sentence belies the spiritual and technical intricacies of this art form. Facing the death of his father, Goto dove deeper into his artistry and craft as a way to understand his father, his ancestors, but also as a way to understand and explore his own identity as an artist. He now owns the Kamakura Carving Gallery in Japan, selling pieces and hosting workshops to continue the Kamakura tradition. From his bamboo art to his popular exhibition in the Tokyo Art Museum, Goto strives for perfection in his work. And he's not alone in the practice. With 28 generations to make proud, Goto shares with us the story of how this tradition came to be in the first place. To start, can you take me back to the beginning of what you know, like 29 generations back to what you know about the beginnings of this sculpting discipline that you do today?
So it goes way back to about 800 years back to the very famous, probably most famous Japanese wood sculpture for Buddhist sculptures named Unkei.
And how did they develop this specific sculpting practice? Like, are there any myths or legends about the origin of how this all started?
In the past, it was the norm for the son, mostly the first son, to take on the work of the father. That was kind of how things went. So even in his family, the Goto family, everyone has been a Buddhist figure sculptor for at least 150 years. It goes back to his great-grandfather in the Meiji period, so that's 1860s to 1900s. This is when Japan was starting to modernize. In the 150 years ago, Japan suddenly made a law splitting Buddhism and Shintoism. And up until that time, Buddhism had come from India. But it had kind of mingled with Shintoism, and they had kind of progressed together. Even there were some shrines and temples that shared the same building. But in the Meiji era, in the late 1600s, the government decided to split that and to give Shinto more spotlight because that's natural Japanese religion. So since they were all carving Buddhist statuary, this was a big hit for them.
Right.
So because the government started this kind of split between Buddhism and Shintoism, some Japanese people felt like this was the time to completely ruin temples, burn them down, or actually tear them apart. And so many of the Buddhist statuary, all this hand-carved statuary, was totally destroyed.
And these are hundreds of years old, right?
Yes, several hundreds of years old, and they would be destroyed. This really ruined the life of many of the sculptors because they no longer had a job. There's no need for, or very little need for, Buddhist figures. So instead, they either had to quit that profession or go into take their skills into other areas. And this is where they started carving tea utensils for tea ceremony, also various things to use in the household, in the kitchen, or in the living room areas, and also items for temples that were not religious statues. For example, little tools that they use in the temples themselves.
And how did that work? Like, were they successful? And did his grandfather say anything about if that was scary to suddenly have to do that transition?
So it was really hard at first. And what they tried to do at first was continue making these Buddhist statues and figures and try to sell them to temples, any of the temples that were left. Actually, trying to sell those figures to the temples was not working well, obviously because of economic reasons. So they started using those skills. And the skills, well, I don't know if you've seen any of these statues, the Buddhist statues, but they're very, very intricate. So they started using those skills in making, first of all, dishes, like large bowls and things like that. And that started selling well, not just to temples, but to regular people. I never met my great-grandfather, actually, but things that I've heard about him are, for one, he was very proud of the fact that he was a Buddhist figure sculptor for so long. He started exporting his figures, his Buddhist figures, and he had figures in the Paris Expo. It was in 1889, and then he started making a name for not just himself, but for this kind of carving, wood carving.
Was this wood carving known outside of Japan before he took it to the Paris Expo, or was this the grand reveal of this art form that had been developing for generations before?
So he's not sure if Paris Expo was the first, but he does know that his grandfather put items in the Chicago Expo as well. But little by little, he was taking them overseas.
And so how did it develop from there? Like, how did your grandfather turn, some expos and creating these dishes and teaware into a business that could sustain over 100 years?
He gained fame overseas, and that kind of came back to Japan as kind of a re-import into Japan, and he started to gain, some kind of a reputation in Japan. As he's gaining his name within Japan, the Yokosuka line, the train line from Tokyo and going through Yokohama to Kamakura was finally set up. So little by little, the people in the Tokyo area and Yokohama area would come to Kamakura by train, and they started setting up second homes there, vacation homes there. It's not that far. I mean, today it's only an hour or so by train. So they're starting to kind of create this wealthy community of summer homes. And I don't know if you know this, but Japanese people love to give gifts when they get home from a trip. It's like you have to buy something, even today. They started buying Kamakura Buri to take back to their friends and family in Tokyo and other places. So this was like a new business for him.
So this created like a boom for the business. And so was it obvious that when your dad was born and came of age, that he would take over this family business?
So one thing is, as he said, the sons always take over the work of the fathers. His father felt the importance of this long history of Kamakura Buri, so he felt like he wanted to take over the business. Actually, when he was young, his father wanted to be an architect. So when Goto-san's dad was 4, his father passed away. This is normal at that time also. There were many craftsmen living in their house. You kind of join the family and you live with them, work and eat and sleep with them. So that's the kind of house his dad grew up in. So those craftsmen that were living in their home together knew that this 4-year-old boy would eventually become their boss. So from the time he was 6 years old, Goto's son's father became his training. So he kind of became an apprentice and started his training in Kamakura Buri. Another thing is that because his father died when he was 4, there was a kind of a rush for him to start working and start actually making money. So it might have been earlier than normal, but this was like the people around him knew that this was important. This was a rush. First of all, so his father apprenticed among all of his grandfather's brothers and sisters. The whole family was involved in the wood carving business. So he apprenticed amongst all of them, and then he went to university. But also during this time, there was World War II. So there was a time when there was a lull in everything. Actually, his father also experienced several times where he was so ill, he wasn't sure whether he would die or live. And so with these various things like these illnesses and World War II, various things, and his father dying so young, he finally decided that he wanted to carry on the Kamakura Buri tradition. And he knew that this was like something that he needed to do within his life. So he had been through a lot of personal issues before he really took on the job of being the head of the family. So from that point on, from after he graduated from university, he just decided he was going to try to hone his skill and carry on the entire art of Kamakura Buri. There were 10 large families of Kamakura Buri families. You know how everybody contributes to the business. There were 10 of them during just before that new law of splitting up the temples and the shrines in Buddhism and Shintoism. By the end of the Meiji period, so by the early 1900s, there were only 2 families left. And his family is one of the 2 families.
What was it about preserving this art form that was so important?
So one thing is the 800 years of history of wood carving. There's a kind of family pride because all of the people in his family have carried it on for so long that it's a point of family pride. One other is it's kind of a responsibility. If his father, and he said in my case as well, if we decided this is it, I'm not interested in carrying on this technique and the art itself, we take on the responsibility of stopping something that was 800 or some years old. And the other thing is that it's a very, very challenging art form. And once you get into it as an artist, it's a personal challenge to you. You want to continue to improve and never want to leave it.
So I kind of now want to come to you. So when you were born, your father started at 6. So when did you start learning about this art form? And what was your childhood like? What are some of your earliest memories with your father and your family?
He was the first male born into the Goto family for 50 years.
Wow.
It's a big thing to have a male in the family. Yeah. In fact, he was born when his dad was 52 years old.
52? That's so old! Does Goto-san have other siblings?
2 older sisters.
Wow, 52. So he really was trying to sneak one in to carry the family discipline.
His dad actually told him that, he had an illness. I don't know what the illness is, but he really thought he might die. So at first he thought, well, I'm going to have to live the rest of my life alone. So I think that gave him more impetus to make a family when he could. Finally, when he did meet the woman he wanted to marry, and they got married and started to have children, that's when he really decided, I need to have a boy as well. His mother was actually really strongly wanted to have a boy so that the boy could take over the Kamakura Buri traditions.
That's a lot of pressure, is it not?
So nowadays, men and women are really much more on an even keel and treated, some say treated equally. But at the time of his parents, it was still really important that the son was the one who took over the family business. So nowadays, probably, if he only had daughters, a daughter could take over the business.
But now, because there was a son, the focus was, okay, we need to have our son take on the family business. And not only that, if your dad's 52 and not in poor, and maybe in poor health, there's like even more pressure to teach you as quickly as possible. So when and how did this training start? Did it start as early as your father?
What you said is exactly what his dad was feeling. Yeah, I have to make sure that he gets all these skills early on. But he conferred with one of his colleagues from university days, who is a professor at an art university. And the professor said, you really have to wait until your son says he wants to be a part of Kamakura Buri. So it turns out his dad actually felt, yeah, I need to start training my son this way. He honored the opinion of his friend, and he never said that openly to his son. He waited until this Goto-san wanted to start Kamakura Buri. Goto-san never felt that much pressure. But when he started high school, he was 15 years old. That's when his father first said to him, what are you thinking about the future? And wanted to know what he wanted to do. So apparently, Goto-san kind of knew in his heart that one day he would have to take over the business. But until that day, he never realized, oh yeah, I have to start training for it or do something about it. So from that point on, his dad told him, so you need to do a 10-year apprenticeship. And he started with clay, making 3D sculptures with clay. So actually, 10 years is longer than most people do. But I think his dad trained for 10 years. So his dad kind of told him that's what you have to do as well.
So he's in high school. He's what, probably 16, 17? And he's about to commit to learning something until he's 26, 27. Basically, all of the life that he's lived, he's committing to doing that towards this one art form. What was running through his mind when he was faced with that? And like, was there anything else that he wanted to do? Like his dad wanted to do architecture. Was there anything else that he was thinking he wanted to do?
Yeah, he had a lot of things he wanted to do besides sculpture. But his dad said 10 years, so he kind of took that as is and didn't really have a good grasp on what 10 years meant to him in his lifetime. So he just kind of started with sketching and using clay and doing any exercise that his father put in front of him.
What were some of the other things he wanted to do?
He kind of was more interested in a more modern take on art. We had a lot of friends who were in art school and even sculptors, but they were doing more modern things and using modern techniques and actually having solo exhibitions even in New York. So to him at that age, that was really amazing and cool, and he would rather be doing that than Kamakura Buri is a very, very, very traditional art form.
So he wanted to blaze new trails in New York. How did he feel starting to work with this art form?
One thing is, his dad was a very strict person. And so he was very strict as he was teaching him as an apprentice. And that was hard on him because it's kind of a time in your life when you actually want to be out having fun. There were many times he thought he wanted to quit, actually.
Okay, so we're talking about the strictness and Goto wanting to like go out and probably hang with friends, talk to girls or something. Like, did you ever rebel, or did you feel like you just had to stay there?
You are totally right. He wanted to play. He wanted to go out and have fun. And the truth is, Kamakura Buri, especially at that time, what he thought his impression of Kamakura Buri was, it's kind of old-fashioned. So Japan was really modernizing at this time, and he started to think that even though this art has been continued by his family and through his father for so many years. Is it really going to succeed? Because it is kind of old-fashioned. The art itself is kind of old-fashioned. So is it really going to succeed in a life where people are kind of trying to modernize even their homes and living situation? So he was wondering about that at the time.
You're wondering whether this art form has legs, and you're also under this strict supervision of your dad. Did you ever try to sneak away or try to do other things, or were you pretty on the path that your father set?
The whole time he was kind of debating back and forth. He really respected his father, but also wanted to do other things. So it was a big time of reflection for him.
When did he start the apprenticeship? How old was he?
He'd only done it for about 4 years with his dad, and then his dad passed away. After his father passed away, he looked at all of his father's artworks more closely. He had never really taken the time to do that, and he kind of reevaluated anything and realized how amazing this technique is and how amazing his dad's art was.
How he looked at that art changed. What did he see in it now?
So at this time, he was in university, and up until that point, he had only done sketching and working with clay. And once he went to university, he started wood carving and started learning it at university. And finally, he realized how difficult the art is. And so once he realized that when you're carving and it doesn't go the way you intended to go, then he started looking at his dad's works of art and realizing how hard it was to get to that point.
Did he feel like he had the tools to get to that point now that his dad was gone? It's like he had this strict teacher for a few years of his apprenticeship, and now he had to figure it out without him.
At that time, no, he felt like he wasn't prepared at all, wasn't skilled enough. And actually, he says, even now, I don't feel skilled enough.
Really?
Right now, there are about 200 to 300 people involved in Kamakura Buri. And to be honest, he's never met someone at his father's level yet.
Wow. So he was the best. His father being gone, how do you forge your own path? And specifically as it pertains to the time period directly after his father passed away, like how does he begin to carve the path himself?
To be honest, he didn't have the skills that he knew he would need, and so it was a very difficult time. But there were still a lot of the craftsmen working with the family that he could depend on to teach him the skills. So, for example, one of the things he did do was look at the pieces that his father had left and copy them. So he would carve something, try to do it exactly the same as his father had made it. And then after everything is carved, you take it to the lacquerer, the person who actually paints it. It's a 20-step process of painting different lacquers on it and polishing it. And he would take it to the lacquerer that his father had always used. And the lacquerer would rub his fingers over the carving and say, yeah, your dad's carving would be much softer here, or you have to change things here. So he would actually be able to tell Goto-san hints of how to improve his skill to be more like his dad's.
We'll get back to the podcast right after this break. Billion Dollar Moves, hosted by Sarah Chen Spellings, is brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network, the audio destination for business professionals. Join venture capitalist and strategist Sarah Chen Spellings as she asks the hard questions and learns through the triumphs, failures, and hard lessons of the creme de la creme so you too can make billion-dollar moves in venture, business, and in life. There's a recent episode on scaling Amazon with Jeff Bezos when one of CNN's top 10 most powerful women in tech, Sandy Carter, is now talking about how she's moving into Web3. It's a super interesting episode. Highly recommend you check it out. And so if you want more of that, listen to Billion Dollar Moves wherever you get your podcasts. And now, back to the podcast.
It almost feels like he's seeing the shadow of his dad or the ghost of his father and trying to like fit together these puzzle pieces that he left behind to understand the art form even more.
Even now, some of his dad's customers who had asked him to carve certain bowls or dishes or whatever still come and talk to him about his dad and different things, stories about his dad as a carver. And from those stories and things that his dad actually taught him long ago, as he's even working today, every once in a while he'll remember a few words that his dad said. And he'll say, oh, now that I see it this way, I get what he's talking about.
There's something beautiful about being connected to your father, and it's like, oh, in a way, your father's spirit lives on through the things that he's taught you and still teaching you today. When you look at his art, you're like, oh, this is how he did it.
He says he doesn't see them very often now, but in his younger days, his dad would come into his dreams, and especially when he has kind of hit a brick wall in his work, his dad would come into his dreams. Sometimes he would actually find hints from what his dad would say in the dreams. Sometimes his dad just seemed to be there, kind of protecting him, looking over him, and it would help solve his problem.
Wow, that's beautiful. I think now, like, what I want to understand is it's part of it is honoring those that came before and learning all that they had to teach. But then the other part is moving the art form forward and improving, learning more. And so as he apprenticed under Hiroshi Kabataki, how did he start to learn new things, and how did he start to put, I guess, his own spin on the art form?
So first of all, even before him, was that the first thing that had to change in this art form was to switch from Buddhist figures to dishes and household items.
Right, that was like one way they modernized.
Yeah, but that was back like in 1819, early 1900s. But at the same time, the items that they were making were different. They weren't Buddhist figurines, but the intention of how they were making them remains the same, even in his work today.
What is that intention?
Extreme attention to detail. And in Kamakura Buri, you cannot rush things. And that's not what is expected today. Everybody wants things the minute they think they want it. And he has to explain to his customers, Kamakura Buri takes a long time. It takes a long time to carve it. It takes a long time to afterwards have it lacquered. So he wants his customers to understand you'll get better quality in Kamakura Buri if you allow us to take our time. He feels that no matter what we're making now, even if it's different from several hundred years ago, the items are different, but the beauty is the same. And actually, he wants to keep that beauty no matter what he's making. That's one of his points, policies for today.
Something else I'd love to know is really like how you came into your own as an artist too, because in 2002 I believe you started artistic activities under the name like Goto Kadai. I was wondering, what was that transition like? Because my understanding initially was, okay, Buddhist statues, and then it went to like kind of like household, I'm gonna use this item like tea plates, and then it seems like it shifted back to more like artistry for artistry's sake, almost, where it wasn't just about utility, the artistry again. And so I'm wondering if that's true, first of all, and also what the switch in 2002 was for the artistic activities.
Yeah, his artist name was Goto Keidai, and his exhibit, that first exhibit, he had the focus on lacquer on wood. And at this time, he started with bamboo wood, which is not normally what you make these Buddhist figurines from, or the tea utensils from. So he made teacups from bamboo and had them lacquered. His name Kyukei was his father's and his grandfather's name, and it's quite common for an artist to keep the name going. Even like in Kabuki theater, you often keep the name going the next generation. So that's Kyukei, but Keidai is his artist name that he created from the characters of his actual name that his father gave him, his personal name. So his actual birth name is Yoshihiro. And his original artwork is under his name, Keidai. It's kind of complicated, but in the characters that we use, there's several ways to pronounce each character. So you can still use the same characters, but have a different name made out of it.
These artistic activities under Keidai feel more like almost like a fine artist, where it's like, I'm just going to make this bamboo teacup because I think it's interesting and I want to explore the depths of this craft. And so it feels like it's breaking new ground in some way. And so I'm wondering if Goto-san saw it that way. And if you could also tell me the story of just like how that's that all unfolded.
There's like one wood that you use in Kamakura Buri, and it's a very hard wood. It's only grown in Japan. So using bamboo was actually kind of revolutionary for this art form. He actually got the idea from when he was digging for bamboo shoots. That's where he started to think about this. One of his relatives actually owned his own small mountain, and he was there digging bamboo roots. And the relative was kind of complaining because bamboo grows so fast. And if you don't keep it under control and cut it down every year, it will take over the mountain. So he's wondering if there's something that could be made out of these bamboos so they wouldn't go to waste, but he could get rid of a lot of them. So when he started making bamboo artwork, it was kind of just for fun at first. He didn't have a big goal in mind. So actually, when he was digging these bamboo shoots, it was in May. That's when they're young and edible. But at the same time, you were not supposed to cut bamboo trees in May because they soak up a lot of water. And it's the worst time to use them as a material, as a wooden material. Anyway, he cut a tree down and he started to make something, even though it was May and he shouldn't have done that. So he cut it down and he dried it. And about this time, so late June, I guess, he wanted to use it, and it was chewed through by bugs.
So probably not great material to use if it has a bunch of holes to use to make teacups.
So that whole thing kind of fell through, and he started to study seriously, and he realized that, or learned that November was the month to start cutting bamboo because they stop absorbing all the water. So he started again in November. So finally he did cut this one tree down, and one bamboo tree, the bamboos have kind of ridges in them, about this far apart. So each ridge you can cut so that the bottom is a ridge. So you can cut about 20 or 30 pieces, and you can make 20 or 30 cups. So at this point, he had these rather different teacups that he had carved and had lacquered. But then he had 20 or 30, so he thought, okay, I can have an exhibit now. But if he started the exhibit using the name Kyukei, and he was the third generation to have this name, and he's doing something a little different, not sure how it was going to go, it could bring a bit of shame to the family name. So he thought this is a good time to change his name as an artist to Keidai. And that's how his name started.
Wow. Okay, so this is like him taking this art form and then shaping it to be his own as well. Like honoring the past, but also honoring the future and his individuality as well.
The cups were really well received by his customers, by his regular customers.
Wow. And did he also do an exhibit? And what was that exhibit like?
Yeah, he did. He actually had an exhibit, and he sold all of the cups.
Wow. So very well received. So it's, wow, that's so cool.
So that kind of put him on a good path and a good mood. And he started collaborating with a copper metal artist. They started with vases, making vases with the bamboo and metalware. Okay, so he started because if you put water in the cups that he's making out of bamboo, it's going to eventually ruin the bamboo because they started to absorb the water. So he started by asking this metal artist to make cups that would fit into the bamboo cups, like kind of an inner lining. So he wanted to cut the bamboo so lengthwise, so it was longer, and put holes where those little ridges are, so that you would stick the flowers in those holes. So he actually had to have the metal artist make small, little, tiny cups that would go into the holes in the ridges of... So you have this long vase, like long half of a bamboo tree, and then holes along there and then little tiny metal containers in the holes. So you could put flowers on like a horizontal vase. Kind of like what he's doing here, putting little containers in a horizontal vase.
I see.
で、それも、売れたんですね。
And those sold like hotcakes as well.
It seems like you're finding your way as an artist. Did you start to feel confident in your ability? You mentioned before that you still think that you haven't learned all the techniques of your father, but what did you think of yourself as an artist at that point?
今は確かに
Yeah, he does feel better now. I mean, he feels better as an artist, and he's able to help support his family, which was much harder in the beginning. And so, in general, everything is much better. But he still keeps in mind what his father used to say is, don't ever start to be lazy or what did they say, sit on your laurels? So don't be lazy and make sure you work hard at it every single day. So it's kind of a little by little continuous thing for as an artist to be closer to what his father gained.
He's done many exhibitions and some solo exhibitions as well. I'm curious when he feels like closest to his heart in making these like objects of beauty.
何年だったかな?
2011. He had an exhibit in Tokyo Art Museum. Actually, it was a kind of a competition, and he created a work with a total of 4 people. It was a collaborative artwork. And it was displayed during this exhibition and really well received and had a lot of visitors to their exhibit. It was like one point where he felt true success as an artist.
And why did he feel that success? Was it because it was seen by a lot of people? Was it the prestige of being in the museum?
そうですね。一つ一つ理由
So, like what you said, Sam, is one was, yes, there were so many visitors, and also because it was at the Tokyo Museum of Art. But the third reason was that he didn't present it as Keidai, his artist name. He presented it as Kyukei, his family sculptor's name. And in that piece, he felt like he was able to express all of the points of Kamakura Buri that he's been trying to work towards all his life. So that gave him the most satisfaction in this instance.
Can we talk about what those points are? And also, I think as it pertains to specific artwork, I would love to know the process of actually making this.
First step in the process is to, first of all, think and sketch out what you're going to make. In his process, first he starts to think of the concept first. So first he draws the actual surface of the bowl or dish that he's going to make. And then he sends that design to the person who actually cuts the piece of wood that you're going to use to make the final product. And then he actually transfers his pattern onto that surface and then starts the very fine woodworking or sculpting process. So then he takes it to the lacquerer, and after all of his carving is done, and he gives specific instructions. For example, he wants it to be bright red or dark red. He gives very specific instructions on how to paint it. Also, on the very final step is when it comes back to his workshop, he has a stamp with his name Kyukei written in the kanji characters. And he uses lacquerware to put that on the back of the work, whether it's a bowl or whatever. So that's the basic process. So before, when I took his workshop last week, and he was showing me pieces that his father had carved. And his father was actually very deeply religious man, Buddhist man. So when he was carving, it was more of a kind of meditative experience when he was carving those statues.
Does Goto-san feel the same way? Is it meditative for him?
When you're talking about actual Zen meditation, which is very, very, very prevalent in Kamakura, that's actually your goal is to find nothingness. So it's a little bit different than that kind of meditation because his goal is quite different than finding nothing at all. So instead, when he's in the zone, as you say, all that he's doing is he hears the sound of each sliver that he takes off of the wood, And the sound and the feel of when his, what would you call that kind of knife that goes in to the wood? It's very, very slight sound. So to him, that's the world he is surrounded by when he's carving.
So then how did your father, how did he think about it in a way that still adhered to that Zen philosophy of like meditating to become nothing or to think nothing?
でもすごくこう仏様
He's not sure because he was young when his dad passed away, but when you're carving a Buddhist figure, you're supposed to be carving the spirit of Buddha into that figure itself. So if you're not a believer, it would be impossible to carve something like that. And his father was a he was very dedicated to Buddha and dedicated to their local temple. So he thinks that his father probably was in, maybe not Zen itself, but some kind of religious mode when he was carving those Buddhist figures.
If your father was carving in the spirit of Buddha, what are you trying to carve?
やっぱりこう完成
When
したもの
he's
が
creating a piece of
100
work,
年は
he thinks about, after it's completed, this could be used for 100 years or more. So one thing is he wants to make sure there's nothing that he's dissatisfied with, that he thinks was kind of a defect or something.
完成度
And
がすご
another
く
thing
高いっ
is,
ていうのは
so he wants to
当
be
然のことですし
perfect, but more
そ
than
の
perfect,
先
he
に
wants to
やっ
think
ぱり僕
about
の
how
考え
people
る
are going to be using it and
何
what
か
the
こう気
feelings
持ち
they're
と
going to
か
have when they're using this bowl
こ
that
う
may
そうい
have
ったも
been
のが込められ
carved
る
by
よう
him
に
100
コン
years
セプトがこう
prior.
いやまあそんなにこれ
So,
といって
in his work, he
いうことで
actually
はない
meets
で
a lot
すけ
of
れど
Buddhist
も
priests.
まあ例えば
Kamakura has hundreds of
単純にこう
temples, so you
お坊
can't
さん
not meet Buddhist
と
priests
か
all
と
months.
接する
So,
機
but in
会
his
が多
work,
くて
because he's making some utensils for temples, he meets
人
Buddhist
と
priests
違うんだ
quite
なもっと
often.
人間っぽい
And
なって
little
思
by
っ
little, he
たん
just
ですね
realized
で父の
they're
方がすご
more
くこう
just regular
もっと思考
humans
が深いな
than
と
what
思っ
his
た時
father
に
saw them as
何か
as
ちょ
more
っと
like
違う
a
気がしたん
different
ですね
emotional level
そうい
of
うことが
humans.
積
He
み重
kind
な
of
って
kept
です
them
ね
more on a pedestal.
時間がそろそろ12
Yeah,
時ですけど
basically, Buddhist priests are
こ
people
れ
too.
まあなん
So
でしょうね
it just kind
だから
of
お坊さんだ
brought
って
them down
人
to
間で
like
す
a
か
just
ら
a regular level
うん
in his own life
必ず
rather
しもそう
than
じゃないっていう
someone
こ
he
とですよ
believed
ね
in.
Do you think you can believe in the tenets of Buddhism and like the spirit that runs through all in Buddhist principles without necessarily deifying the monks themselves?
うんもちろんあります
He believes in the Buddhist teachings.
What does he believe now?
もっとなんだろう
Actually, he wishes
信じら
he
れた
could
ら
believe in
とは
Buddhism
思うんです
deeper. He
自分
wishes
自
he
身
could
がも
get
っと
rid of
なん
all
かい
the
ろんなこ
daily
となし
things
で
and
もっと純
just
粋に信じ
believe
られた
in
ら
what
いいな
the
と
Buddha
思う
taught
けれ
us.
どもまあそこに
So maybe
まだ
he just
もしか
hasn't
したら逆に
reached
た
that
どり着
point
けないの
in
かも
his
しれない
life
で
right
すね
now.
So I would love to focus on a exhibition or piece of work that he's done that he feels is closest to his heart, that he feels is the best representation of like how he wants to show up in the world and how he wants to express himself. What would that be and what was he trying to express?
あれでしょまだこれからですかねま
He
だ
says
もっ
actually
と
no,
多
not
分
yet. He feels like he's still on the path
この
towards
先がある
something
と
and he
思うんです
hasn't
ね
actually reached
今
a
はま
point
だ
where he would
道
say
の途中だ
this
と
is really
感じます
me. This is what represents me. He's still working on that path.
Does he have an idea of what he would want that to be?
今ずっと
He's had
考
a
えてる
piece of
ずっと何年も考え
artwork
て
in
る
his mind for
作品
several
が
years
あ
now,
ります
and he's been mulling
た
it
だま
over,
だきちっと
but
こ
he
う
can't
形
come to a
に
final shape
こ
of
の
what it's
形が
going
いい
to
って
be.
なかなか決まらない
So
で
there is
少し
something
ず
he's
つ
working
動い
on
て
as
る
a
んですけれ
goal,
ども
but it hasn't
うん
taken form yet.
It's really cool. He's been doing this art form for many years now. If there was one thing that he would like people that may have not experienced it before to know about Kamakura Buri, what would he tell these people to show why this art form should continue and survive and be appreciated?
まあ長く続いてきた伝統
One
っていう
is
ことですね
it has
それ
such a
と
long
歴
tradition,
史によって
and so it would be very
大きく
wasteful
ス
to
タイルを
lose the
変え
entire
た
tradition. And
ん
the
です
second
けれ
is
ど
that
も
it has
その中
survived
で
throughout
やっぱ
history,
り
and history has
続いてきたっていう
changed,
の
but
は
Kamakura Buri
うん
still exists.
今現代
So
も
he
必
feels
要
it,
と
it's
されてい
essential
る
to
からだ
keep
と
it
思うんで
going,
すね
and he feels that it
なので
is still essential in daily life.
多
And
分この先も
the third one
い
is
ろい
the
ろとスタイル
style
が
may
変わ
change
っていっ
even
たり
from now. The style may change, but it remains important because the technology, the techniques that he uses to create it, and the spirit that is included in the style is still important. So he would never want that to be lost.
When he says spirit, what does that mean to him?
難しいですね。
You ask difficult questions.
それはずっとこう探求し続ける。
One is searching for what is most important
探し続けるその
in the
一番
craft,
大切なことを
and then continually
常にこう
trying to
探し
improve
続け
on
て
your own
よ
craft.
り良
And
い
that
品
should
を
show as
より良
part
い
of the
ものを
spirit
作るっていう
within the
気持
works that
ち
you create.
それを言います。あ、
He has one more thing that he really wants to stress
それで
is that Kamakura
もう
Buri
一つ大切なのは
shows the respect for
前の
ancestors,
その
especially for his ancestors doing that for so many years. So that's like one of the big
ずっと持
reasons.
ち続けて
Does Goto-san have any children?
Yes, he has
子供は
children.
男の子は
He has 3 boys.
Does he want them to take on the tradition that he's carried for so many years?
まあそれは
So he
僕が
wants his
どういう
sons
仕
to
事を
look at
す
the
る
way
かによっ
he
て
works and look at the
それを見た
quality
彼
of the
らが
work and the quality of
いい仕事
Kamakura
だと思え
Buri.
ばその仕事
And
を
if they
続けたい
think
と
it's
思うで
worth
しょうし
continuing, he wants them
こ
to
れ
take
じ
it
ゃあダ
on.
メだと思っ
But
た
if
ら
they don't think
も
that,
う
he's
続かないと
okay
思う
with
んで
it
すね。
ending there.
で
When
その
he was young and he was,
僕が若い頃に
apprentice to his father,
もうや
there
め
were
たい
so
と思
many
ったけ
times
れ
that he
ども
wanted to
父親
quit.
の仕事
But
を
then
見
when he
て
started
す
looking
ご
at his
くいいも
father's
の
work
だ
and
って
looking at
思
how
っ
his
た
father worked,
よう
he
に
decided to keep it going.
僕が作った
So
も
he's
のを
hoping
彼
that
らが
his
それを
works
感
and
じて
his
くれる
pattern
よう
of
に
working
まあ僕
will
は
do
努
the
力しな
same
きゃ
for
いけ
his
ないそういう
sons.
ふうに考えて
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, DM us at Finding Founders Podcast on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook. Finding Founders is produced and hosted by me, Samuel Donner.
Our audio editing team lead is Ashley Jimenez, with support from
Jessica Morales, Miley Lipton,
Siyu Pan,
Kenny Ray,
Josie Yo,
Matt Fernandez,
and Merritt Hill.
Our outreach and research team lead is Desiree Nunez, with support from
Marissa Granados,
Monica Lee,
Sarah Tiersma,
and Yao Liu.
To see more of what we're up to, subscribe to our newsletter at findingfounders.co. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.